Story time! Time to start the day!
Yeah, that one API strat we did there was awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed
That was another peak moment for me. We've lost some of the threads on that, but I loved that API strat event. I love that facility, the building, the old Bourse, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
It's where they used to do the originally they did like trading of actual stock, like you'd bring your grain and everything off the boat, and there it was, and then they turned it into the stock exchange for a while, right? I think that was right.
It went from one period to the next, and the abstracting away commodities. And my favorite tweet from the week is the one of the person saying, "I'm only just now learning that when the piggy goes to market, it like wasn't going to shop, like going to the grocery store," which I love. It's a great one.
And there's a good story there. That's like who is that? Charles Addams. Remember? Well, Addams Family was a TV show, but Charles Addams cartoons. They always had that sort of dark moment. There's a Charles Addams cartoon. They're always like sort of creepy characters, right? And the father is doing the little toes. And this piggy went to market, and this piggy went wee all the way home, and this piggy.
Yeah, the one who went home, didn't sell or something.
Right. Yeah, it didn't work out. But if you got more than 5 toes, that thing kind of breaks down real quick.
I think I think Tina Fey is like one of the best like writers who's been around in a long time, and I love some of the subtle moments in 30 Rock. Like some of them I don't get anymore because they were very like timely. But I was watching an episode last night, and it's related to this. Kenneth's mom is like, and when that kid used to beat you up, I ate it. Like, and she started off like it was a kid on the playground, but like it was a goat that was beating up Kenneth. And like, it was just the way she said it, like it led you down, and then it switched at the end. I didn't perform it as well as the actress who plays it. I like those digs. This is not how I thought we'd start.
That's right. That's right. How about you? What's been going on for you this weekend?
Yeah, it's been an interesting week. I would say it's all open API and async API. It's all about the specs now, and just trying to figure out my world where, in the Swagger open API universe, how telling stories and people talk and interact, but then async, and then JSON schema, and then Postman collection. So it's all about API specifications, but it's not really about the specs. It's about the people, because it's about the politics and people in the OAI. So one of the things I'm working on is like trying to get them all into a foundation in somewhere, or a standards body, and and whether the OAI is the home for async API or JSON schema and those conversations, or they should go somewhere else. And these aren't technical discussions. These are people discussions, and like how many people know the history of all of these. And I have a lot of history. I know all the kind of backroom stories and things that happen. And so it's a lot of swapping stories and educating people about like how we got here, why these things matter, why maybe they don't matter. I'll just throw that in there. But it's been a spec week. We'll call it that.
That's interesting. It's a spec week, but when you told me this was coming, like this was going to be your focus, my immediate thought was technicalities, right? Mm-hmm. How do you describe the field, blah blah blah. But you just laid out a completely different storyline that exists, that has to be there, which is this. It's about people. It's about socialization. It's about organization. It's about sharing. It's about storytelling. That's really cool. I really like that.
Yeah, no, it's been good. I'm neck deep in it, but I'm getting my bearings, and I'm excited about it because it's kind of my new full-time job. So yeah.
Cool.
So what do you guys think about this whole API storytelling? I mean, I didn't get to catch up with you guys after last week, and so I think at least moving forward, like editing that one, like trying to just grab it and the last week's, we're talking process and we're talking shop. Like, what are we doing? How are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Okay, yeah. Do you guys want to do it again? Yeah. So in that vein, like, how are you guys feeling about the format approach? Anything? Keep it free flowing. What do you guys think?
I really enjoyed both watching it and getting to review the conversation we had, and also kind of the impact having the conversation had on me over the last week, and thinking back to just a lot, like I wrote in that post I published earlier, but like thinking back to like the impact of the stories on how I've worked was really interesting. And if anything, it like made me kind of like try to be more conscious about collecting stories, but also making sure that I'm sharing them. So like I have a lot of stories from the API world that I tell internally, but I don't tell externally. And if anything, talking to both of you last week has made me like more motivated to try to share those stories so that everyone benefits from them too.
You know, I heard a similar sentiment read a similar sentiment from Kelsey Hightower this week on Twitter. It was something along the lines of, I'll misquote him and Kelsey can fix it. I used to think of myself as self-taught, but now I realize all those blogs, all those articles, all those books I read, those are the people who were teaching me at the time. So I think that sort of follows, a little bit of what you were saying as well, Aiden, is the idea that, reflecting back, it's like, yeah, I've learned a lot from a lot of people. And this goes to that sharing notion, that idea that the stories you have can really help change other people, which I really like.
So one note on that, because of my partner in crime, Audrey, who does education technology, and she's a perpetual critic of technology and all the illnesses that we suffer from. But the one, she pushes back on the self-taught autodidact notion quite a bit with people because of our basically our privilege and not being able to see how we learn things and understand it, and just taking for granted that we know these things, and hey, I learned this on my own, not I learned it from this person over here, I learned it from this person over here and this person. And so from our position of privilege, we tend to overlook those things. But I think echoing what you guys said is like, yeah, sharing and sharing the stories is equal part of the storytelling. Referencing others in your storytelling when possible. I'm like, hey, I picked up this idea from so-and-so. I try to do that. I'm not perfect. And then it fades away and then becomes my idea to a certain degree. But I was reminded of this in neck deep in Dream Machines about Licklighter. I think I might have mentioned this before, but how Norbert Weiner was very, kind of a father of compute, one of the early thought people, was very annoyed when some people took his ideas, like von Neumann took some of his ideas and didn't cite, built on them. And then some people would take von Neumann's ideas. Claude Shannon took some of von Neumann's ideas and some of Norbert's and pissed both of them off, and because he didn't cite them properly. So I think sharing and citation, I think there's and maybe you got comments on this, Aiden, from a comedy standpoint. I know there's attribution there, but I think sharing and community acknowledgement's just very important in all this, just to leave it there.
Yeah, I think, so one thing I would say about my thought process, and I think a lot of other people's thought process, is like, a lot of us think like jazz, like we don't always remember like where we heard a jingle, but like we heard it somewhere, and it might not be that we may not play the jingle back, but we play something else differently because we heard the jingle. And I think that is something that like makes like joke attribution and joke theft like harder to track down sometimes. Like I've definitely heard people tell a joke or do something in an interesting way, and I'm like, I don't know why I didn't do that before, and then I do it with my own spin, and like I don't feel like I'm stealing, but I definitely, like, after I tell the joke, I try to be like, and I heard that from someone else. Like there's this one guy on a Zoom comedy show I was a part of like 3 weeks ago, and he did 3 impressions. So he was like, this is Martin Scorsese, this is Dwayne The Rock Johnson, and then he did this is President Obama. And he turned on a Zoom background, and then he ducked out of the view, and there was just a picture of Obama. And it was like a funny clip. Like it wasn't what you were expecting, because his first 2 impressions were good. So then I did like a similar bit, and I didn't feel, it wasn't based on impressions, it was based on favorite places, but like it used a piece of his thing, but I didn't feel like I was stealing it. So that kind of is how I think about it. But especially in like technology realms, like citations, I think are, if you directly copy something, like you should cite it, or if you learn from something, you should try to attribute. But I think a lot of the more interesting ideas are like those compound things that you were saying, where like Shannon combined two other ideas, and like those things should be like, I think that's where most of the innovation happens. If it was just copying and pasting, that's not innovation. But if it's copying and recombining, then that's like something that's new that wasn't there before.
Yeah, that I have a similar sort of feel to that as well, because I also play a lot of jazz. I used to play a lot of jazz, and that is very true, right? So there's this combination, at least in the music space, there's this combination of sort of revering someone, and the way you show your respect is you actually learn to memorize the thing they improvised. Mm-hmm. So it would be like memorizing freestyle rap and then doing it again, right? And so nobody would confuse that with actually freestyle rap, but they would notice that it's a performance, and maybe a performance, to honor somebody. But at the same time, one of the reasons you do that is to memorize all these things. To use Kelsey's analogy, all these pieces now become snippets that you have as your library, as your own set. So stringing bits together is another thing in jazz where you actually use recognizable quotes, like you were talking about the jingle. And you say, oh, that's a Charlie Parker. He just did a Charlie Parker lick, or he just did a Charlie Rouse lick, or he just did a Thelonious Monk lick, or Grover Washington, so on and so forth. So then that's another kind of veneration, which is it's kind of like, if you're in on it, you sort of see it as well. So I think this goes on all the time in all sorts of lives, and I think that's actually some of what storytelling really does. We observe these things, we can incorporate them into what we do. And in some ways you might think about it's the stories that are actually the thing that have elevated us, from an evolutionary standpoint, because the stories transcend time and the stories transcend individuals. So we have Greek stories. Greek stories were important to tell us things, and we refer to Greek characters today. And that's a kind of memory that a lot of other creatures don't have. So I think that idea of taking those bits, citing is important, but taking those bits is just sort of kind of built into what we do.
Yeah. I liked. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, before it escaped my mind, I really like what Audrey sort of shared, and then you shared to us, which is that there is no self-taught. It occurred to me that like the two words are wrong. Like self, clearly not. You can descend into the particulars, which is what I always like to do. You descend into the particular and you're like, okay, so you learn to program on your own. You type something into the Python interpreter and it yelled back at you. Someone wrote that error message. You were taught by that person or the people who contributed to that library and made it learnable. Like even if you were alone on an island with a compiler, like you are not self-taught. And then the taught is like also the wrong thing, because wouldn't someone who's open-minded not say they were teaching themselves? Wouldn't they acknowledge that they were synthesizing information, like at the most, but not teaching themselves? Like just the two words just seem wrong. And her calling that out and you sharing that, it's just like, I can't get out of my head now how I've said that, and I don't think those two words mean what I thought they meant when I was saying them.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. I love analyzing ourselves at that level and realizing just how wrong we were saying something for so long. I mean, I think all of this is echoes throughout the API space, to API storytelling. Like our inability to reuse and share patterns and designs, and acknowledge there's a commons that we should all be working from and putting into, I think it's systemic. And I think it's money, trying to make money and say that little piece is mine. I've got people coming up to me all the time and go, hey, I read something, over there, someone wrote it and it's clearly yours, and I'm like, I go look at it, I'm like, they took the essence, they probably read my work, and like, but I don't care. Like I want people to, if they just like grab one of my posts and they use it, I'll say, hey, and it didn't cite me, I'd be like, hey, that's mine. But if they just reuse my ideas, I'm like, yay, all for that. So when it comes to API designs, I really think, let's let's share them. Let's openly license them. Let's say, hey, these are in the public commons. Use my image API, because we've all built on each other. And I think some of the Oracle versus Google copyright case is kind of the tip of that, but is, the original Google storage API, I remember, said we're Amazon S3 compliant. I remember Pinboard saying that they were Delicious compliant. They were just basically attribution, but hey, we're taking this design and we're reusing it. And that allowed Delicious customers to go straight to Pinboard and become immediate an audience for Pinboard, because they took a known design pattern, a known that people could use and put it to use. So I think our views and being too strict and licensing and worrying about making money around these things tend to gum up the gears and make it harder for us to work. And I've learned a lot from storytelling and the music industry, taking it back, that about how all this works or doesn't or should work, I guess. So
yeah, I think we get kind of wrapped up in ownership a little bit too easily. Some of us do. I know I have to fight. I have to, keep in mind, I've said this a lot of times, I don't actually invent things, but I find connections to things. Most of the stuff I write about, most of the stuff I talk about are literally just connecting existing things, maybe in unique ways, or noticing how similar they are. And to me, that is always me trying to acknowledge the stuff we were just talking about. I've learned from so many other people. If you hear me say something, it's absolutely true that it came from somebody else. That's kind of my way of doing that. Occasionally, I do find, somebody just said what I said, or somebody just, printed what I already created, or something like that. And there's like a little thing that goes off in my head. It's like, oh, it's mine. It's like, well, where's that coming from? To me, it's sort of like, that's a weird reaction to finding that somebody has done something, especially after my little speech about, honorifics, quoting people to like as a way of honoring them. So I think sometimes we get caught up in that, and then money becomes important. We create barriers to specifically protect our monies, right? So whether our value, and our value might be users, right? So I'm actually going to make it hard for you to actually move from one place to another because I want to protect that in some way. And those are not always the most positive aspects of our behavior, I think. So being reminded that making it easier, making it more accessible, I think is a powerful way to remind us what we're the good side of what we do.
Yeah, I think that as I've been like playing out this idea of the jazz in my head the last couple minutes, and also thinking about how we said storytelling is like important to industries last week, it makes me wonder, as you guys have been talking about money, I'm a founder of a startup, like I need to make money, like thinking about this stuff, and what I would give out, like pretty much every line of code we've written is open source, and I don't mind giving code away. I feel like the thing that I hold like closer are like user stories, actually. And as we're talking, I'm like, maybe that's slimy that I hold user stories close, because I think like, depending on, if you just ask people 5 questions, the same 5 questions, and 100 different people the 5 questions, you might get a lot of similar answers. But if you can show people, like part of my interviewing process is to guide people through a journey of discovery where like I show them something that they haven't seen before and I get their reaction to it, and then I interrogate that reaction, and then I show them something else they haven't seen before that relates. And like I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about this new idea we have for how to do API mocking the right way this time. And it's like based on like a bunch of those sort of deep inquiries into like, well, why did you want it that way? Like, why wouldn't this other tool solve that for you? Like, and there's a unique insight in there that's like something I haven't moved on or built yet that I think is valuable. And it's like, should that be shared or should it not be? And I don't have, like, I'm just being authentic and open right now. Like, I don't have like an honest answer. Like, I feel like I shouldn't share that, but I could see an argument where like, if other people were sharing theirs, I would learn from that too. So it's like, it's that asymmetry, and the reason why there's like necessary middlemen, like the reason why credit reporting agencies exist is because the banks want to know who pays their bills, but they don't want to share their data with each other. So they share their data with a third party. And what's interesting to me, and bringing this all full circle, if there was just like a list of user stories about how people use all the tools today, that was public, that was, you know, interviews that we ran with these people, and that everyone could learn from or leave analysis on and communicate around, that's like the bank of user stories that someone coming into the space or someone trying to improve something could work with. And it might be that, you know, I'm aware of something that would change Postman's roadmap, and Postman might be aware of something that would change my roadmap, but we got there in different ways. And I can't say for sure whether the world would allow information to flow so freely, but like that is sort of like the ultimate expression of what we're talking about, right? Is like the bank of user stories you build product on top of being shared in public and open.
I just had a great startup idea. Just kidding. Continue.
Yeah. No, I you know, so you're really kind of digging, you're scratching something in me as well, and that is this notion about what is it you're willing to share and what is it you're not willing to share, and why is it, right? So to go deeper as well. Well, is it I'm not sharing because some people don't want to share because they think it's super valuable, right? Oh, this is valuable. I can't give this up. Some people don't want to share because they think it's super stupid. Mm-hmm. Like they might have this really great idea, but they're not going to share it with anyone because they make a judgment. Like
or they don't see what's valuable about it, or
right. Exactly right. They don't see the that's silly. Who would want that, right? Kind of thing. So there's sort of there's this whole stream of things behind that particular motivation, which I find really, really fascinating. Because while you were talking, the first thing that came to my mind was, man, I would love to hear what these stories are. I'd love to hear this. And then I immediately said, gee, I don't know if I want to be interviewed. Like I sort of like turned it around right away. Like, I don't know if I want to answer those, whatever. I was imagining all these things, right? Mm-hmm. So all of that stuff plays as well. And that goes back to this is all about socialization. At least I just turned it into this whole sort of like, it's about psychology. And I don't know if that's really what you're aiming for or not.
I think that's a fascinating idea. I think that's a great idea. Seriously, for a startup, like if you could make a place where you could go do this and all parties involved got value from it. This is another one of those, and you did it API. An API.
Yeah. Of course there's an API.
Of course.
It's the only way to get the data in.
Yes.
I mean, come on.
And out. And so, but people can't come together. Like the value of something like that collectively, if done well, and could have a monetization layer and whatever, but if it could be done collectively, it'd be so much more valuable for all of us as a company to be able to see what are the rising persona stories, in the space. Because Postman has this really nice list, because we got 13 million developers who have signed up and said what they do, and we have this kind of transition from back-end developer, full stack developer to DevOps to Q&A to all these kind of evolutionary versions of that. And if we could all share stories about who those people are, what's happening to our worlds, I think collectively we'd be better off. But the problem is, and you see this with things like Crunchbase, is Crunchbase is a treasure trove of information and data, which should be open, but is slowly made more closed and just amongst us, a group of people. And any other startups who try to start and do the same thing, AngelList and others, are kept small for a reason. But those are all just facts. Company names with like investment rounds, those are just facts. They shouldn't be locked up, but because someone sees their value and shared importance, they're locking it up, and and this is kind of how power works. So that's a great idea. I wouldn't want to be involved with it because it's people's stories. It's very valuable to startups. Someone's going to come around and lock it up and like play hardball with it. And I step away from those things. It makes me sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the collective. It's a collective over time scale. Sorry, over size scales. Like the collective thing for 3 people in a room that's best for them is different than the collective thing for 10 people versus 100 versus 1,000. And I think this is like the hard thing about the world being the way so globalized and the way it is like you can zoom all the way in and be like, this is great. And then you zoom out and you're like, well, now my interests are different because my tribe is this company I'm a part of, not the whole of the industry or humanity. It's like the scale you look at matters. The regime matters. And I think that's why like I'm kind of like hesitant to be like, well, I don't want to be the first one to share my stories because I have three key insights that in my code's open source. You're never going to learn the insights that I teach our people through the code. And it's been rough, like interrogated constantly with different people that I talk to, and these interviews that I do with users go into weird directions that you wouldn't think that they'd get to, and like we learn a lot from it. But yeah, like I wouldn't want to be the first person to turn my cards over, which is the other part of the problem. So yeah, like I almost was thinking maybe like the lazy way of this is like API evangelist articles, but like sorted not by date but by theme or topic or something. Like it's sort of that, but not quite, because like it's not like it's actually from a user's mouth directly, but it's still insightful. Like, and my API evangelist scraping tool that I use to look up certain keywords ages ago, like is sort of that, but it's not quite what I'm talking about having.
Yeah. I see your approach being super valuable. I know you a little bit, and I can imagine where you go, but trying to attach a value, things that are valuable, and then attach money and revenue to them. I've done these exercises over and over with all of the bits, the digital bits, especially that I put out there. These kind of video interviews, webinars, live streams I do, blog posts, short form, long form. I know all of my bits. I know what matters to me. I know what has an impact and generates traffic. I know all those things, but I just always come back around to like the brand really is the value to a certain degree for me. Like all of that is just kind of, I don't know. It's valuable, but the only monetary value is collectively me, Ken Lane. Like talking to you is where it all accumulates at. Selling individual things, webinars. I mean, Mike knows what's the value of one of your books, Mike. Like money in your pocket, in your bank account versus, your talks versus, your, and then where does that regular paycheck come from? It's like, it's tough. It's tough to figure out in a storytelling world.
It's tough to figure out in a storytelling world because we have these other obligations, right? So like I've got to make sure that I pay bills. I got to make sure to this. So I have to cover for something. And I think we attach value in certain ways. I think at the same time, one of the things I've learned, sort of like what you were talking about, Ken, is this idea that your brand kind of, if you were just really to kind of like unpeel the onion here, your brand is what people pay attention to. The stories you tell are your opportunity to cultivate your brand, or to change your brand, or to establish your brand in a new space and things like that. The work you do is always an opportunity to be introduced to others. I think one of the privileges, we talked about privilege a little earlier, one of the privileges we've had over this last decade or so, like in this new century, if you're really going to go that far, is the notion that we could manage our own brand. That was incredibly difficult to do in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. You had to have a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of energy to manage your brand.
Your own railroad, basically, was the way you did it.
Yeah, exactly right. Or you owned a record company, or you started, there are all sorts of things. Remember, in movie studios in the U.S., all through most of the 20th century, you were in a stable. You were captured by, the Warner Brothers or the Universals or whatever. And it wasn't until the 40s and 50s that individual artists started to say, no, I'll manage that myself. They became producers. They started studios. Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's a great example of that on the television side, right? So this has been this sort of evolution, and now we're the beneficiaries. We're standing on the shoulders of all these people where we can craft our brand the way we wish, and that allows us to decide where we spend our time and what kind of energy we spend it on. And storytelling is all a key element of that. I know I learned from I think it was from Roy Fielding, said something like, every system has an architecture, whether you've actually consciously designed it or it just kind of, emerged out of whatever you were doing. And that's sort of like our brands. All right. Our brands are the combination of all the stories we tell, even if we're not actively telling stories. So that's sort of each of us. And I think that's a big part of what we experience when we think about, so it's what I experience when I think about storytelling is who am I touching? What is the audience? What am I trying to communicate? How does that fit with the way I do things anyway? So I tend to think a lot about those things, and storytelling is the way I think about it.
Yeah, it's the API evangelist journey for me has just showed me. I kind of wrapped a little bit. I didn't do as good a job as I wanted. The story for the video, wrapping the video from last week that I did, is just API evangelist was very much a business storytelling production. But because I applied or evolved and developed my own approach to doing it as an API analyst, I would say akin to what Aidan just talked about with his interviewing and user. I interrogated the API space in a certain way, and I processed that in my own kind of honest, no bullshit voice. Kind of created this whole API evangelist. Kind of he's got quite a bit of ego, and is cocky sometimes. I don't usually go out picking fights, but I'll there's this whole thing. But I started interrogating APIs in a certain way, and then I started tripping up and stumbling just kind of over life throughout this. It was like divorce, Trump, all these things that caused me to stumble as a human being, alcohol, traveling too much, all very storytelling related things. My health started failing. I'm pushing 50. I know Mike's gonna laugh at me, but I'm old. I'm old, and but I started applying that process to myself, and interrogating myself. And I came up with I found a lot of interesting nuggets, a lot of things and then I was able to somewhat also feed that back into my API evangelist persona, as far as my brand, and be able to go, okay, well, Ken's no bullshit. It definitely cost me some jobs. Like, there are companies who straight up said they would not hire me now because I say too much. We'll just leave it there. And I'll never get a job there because of that. But I also increased my street cred and my brand to some others who are like, oh, Ken's like, no bullshit, like we can trust what he's going to say and other things. So the storytelling value in a business sense on my brand, but then the overlap with my personal, I find regularly fascinating. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, I think one thing I've experienced, like even this week in personal life, is when a bunch of hard things happen at the same time, they start to like cross-pollinate each other. Like when you get to say like, oh, I'm the no bullshit person, to use that example, like it comes into the other part of life. And then like you can see like all of yourself, I think, a lot clearer. This is the same effect that happens when you read two books about the same subject at the same time. The fact that you are contrasting these alternative viewpoints, like my favorite questions to ask users or people I meet or anything is not what do you think of blank. It's like compare X and Y, and it's like one of the most revealing questions, because it forces you to actually be conscious and think. And that's why I think this idea that like personal life and professional life and technology, like that's the first question you asked on the last thing. It's like, how does this relate to APIs? And it's like, well, being better people and like being conscious of ourselves and our stories makes everything we do better. Helps us take on new challenges and get through hard times and see ourselves clearly. Like I have this thing where sometimes the phrase I use is X presents as. And one thing that I realize is that like I have anxiety, and one of the things that for me, like prudence, sometimes I think I'm doing something for like logical reasons, but I'm actually avoiding something. So it's like avoidance presents as prudence. And I have like a few monikers from my life where it's something presenting as something else. But as soon as I can see that and I can write them into the Mad Lib, it's so easy to change it, because it's like, oh, well, of course, like I can give a logical reason why this is the right thing to do, but I'm also just avoiding the thing I don't want to do. So I should just do the thing I don't want to do. And my little like heuristic for first-time founders that I talk to is I ask them, "What's the thing you're most dreading having to do next?" And they say like that thing. And I was like, so most of the time, if you're starting a company, like whatever that thing is the next thing you're supposed to do. And it's almost always right. Like it's very few times I've asked that question and heard their story, and it's not been like the answer I would have given otherwise. But it comes from them if they are in that model. And yeah, I just think like that's the power of this stuff. And I'm rambling, but I think it's valuable.
I like it.
Yeah, I think one of the things you've said here that it is probably something that came up last week as well, but when I think about stories in general, it's the stories we tell ourselves, right? Like you were just talking about, X presents as Y is really a story snippet, right? Like that's a prompt for a writer, right? X presents as Y, do 1,000 words, right? Yeah. That's exactly how it worked when you're writing. So to be able to go ahead and create prompts out of real life, right? That's an incredibly powerful thing that gives you an opportunity. Now, we would say it allows you to introspect, it allows you to examine or whatever. You're telling a story. So let me explore the idea that it may be possible that my anxiety is actually just avoidance of the next thing I should be doing. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with that next thing. Explore that as an option. Write 1,000 words. Do 5 minutes on it in your head. Can be a super powerful tool for all sorts of things. One of the ways I use a similar version of that is something I learned when I was working a little bit with Microsoft. And one of the things Microsoft, they brought a bunch of people together. They were trying to brainstorm what eventually would become the .NET platform. And they said something like, what if you never had to compile, but you always got compiled code? And we were like, what? What are you talking? So they would just ask questions. They would ask all sorts of questions. What if you never had to actually upload anything anymore, but it just ran? What if they would ask all sorts of sort of seemingly non sequitur items, and just to kind of see if anything jogs, if anything clicks. And it reminds me of the line that I think is a kind of a meme. The securest computer is one that's not connected to the internet, that's buried in a safe at the bottom of the ocean, and then I'm still not sure. Right? I mean, think of the oddest thing. What would it take is another one that I learned from my wife. She said, what would it take for you to get you to do X? What would it take for you to be healthier? What would it take for you to take out the trash? Like, what would it take to put you in a car today? Like, we use this as a device to get people to think. So I think that X presents as Y is a super cool little prompt. I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, the stories we tell ourselves. I mean, I think we could just keep going on about that. And for me, like that's been the big reveal with storytelling is it's not just the writing and the words. It's unpacking me and the stories that I tell myself, or the stories that I believe that other people told, and I told myself it in a way that made it work and made it just sink in, and that's like part of me, but it's just was a story I was either handed, as part of the nightly news in 1987, during the Reagan era at a certain moment in time, and thus that's the truth, and I never like unpacked, and I would say we don't have time to always do that, but like one you'll see, it's actually a story you'll see this weekend come from me is me trying to unpack why. So I have a new dog called Poppy, which there's a whole other story behind Poppy, but Poppy is great. Poppy's changed our world. She's like 14 months old, just a bundle of joy, and makes her life great. And I'm like, have all this anxiety about Poppy growing old. Poppy's 14 months old. I'm like, really keep thinking Poppy's going to get old. She's going to be this old dog. And then I realize I'm like, oh, I never unpacked my dog dying, the one I had as a kid. And then he died when I was like 32. So I had him when I was like 16, 17, all through my early part of my life. And then I had to have him put down when he was 17. But I was so busy at that point in my life. I had a startup, I had a marriage, I had a mortgage, I had all these things going on. I never really processed that I lost him. And I, over just doodling and writing some thoughts about my anxiety with why am I worried about this young dog being old? I like could not figure it out. I just got the thread on that, like, oh, I never mourned Tripper. His name was Tripper, but you know, Tripper he did the whole Grateful Dead tour with me in the early 90s. Just so there's a whole story there that we won't go down. But Tripper was
the name.
Yes. He wasn't my dog to begin with, so I did not name him. Just to put it, I saved him from someone else who had him and was not taking care of him. But I did not change his name. But he was a red heeler, and I had him for years, and he was my bud. He was my homie. And I just got too busy to mourn him properly. And now I'm like, oh, you know, I mean, he's been dead 15 years. So like, now I'm getting to it. But writing down in my notebook and stories about how I'm feeling, interrogating how I'm feeling, my anxiety leading up to something. It's like, oh, that wasn't Postman Galaxy, the conference I did, anxiety. That was just, you know, and it's all intertwined. But now I've got a thread. I'm going to process it, unpack it as its own story, and then I can move on. And hopefully that's one little less piece of anxiety that I have moving forward. So that stories we tell ourselves, I mean, I think I just told myself a story at some point that I'm tough, you know, I'm a grown man, I'm 32 years old, I can't, the dog died, move on, you know. But then later on, you know, 15 years later, I'm like, wait, no, there's more to it. So
yeah, that's I think that's like a really interesting way to bring all this stuff together, because you practice writing and you practice taking complicated things that you're seeing in the real world and like turning them into short form ways of understanding, like whether it's like technology, but also on kindling.com and your own personal life and the sketches in your book. Like, I just, to close a thread on this, like, it seems like the practice you're getting in API Evangelist, definitely you've learned how to, or built the skill to help you interpret the stuff happening in your real life too. And it probably happens in both directions. And I just think that's like a cool thing that, I don't know if it's like said out loud and appreciated often, but like I think it's really cool that you've been able to like build a life telling stories, and that the experience in one helps you with the other. And I just think that's like something that's cool. And
well, and to bring it full circle, build on what you just said. So API Evangelist fed Ken Lane and make this possible. I would say it gives back by me being able to unpack Ken Lane using this is the only reason I'm still doing API Evangelist and give a shit about APIs, because I've hit the wall with APIs more than once, and very publicly in a couple of those situations. And me being able to do that is the only reason I'm still able to do what I do as API Evangelist and Postman. So thank you.
It's really, we were talking earlier about what we get out of the storytelling, and we were talking about money, but that seems like the most valuable thing that you could be getting out of something, Ken.
Yeah.
And it's really cool that you're getting it.
Yeah, no, it's I said in the post I wrote, wrapped this first story, that sounds corny to say, but stories are the most important thing in my life right now. Like, it is the thing that I use to make money. It's why I get paid the big bucks, you know, but it's also the thing that's just, you know, fucking gets you through the day, you know. It's like, it makes it so that you can like put one step in front of the other, you know. And I'm gonna start doing on the health kick, you know, like I'm, you know, I gotta go in, I'm deaf in my left ear, you know, and I'm just like, I gotta make the doctor's appointment, and I finally got the referral from a doctor, but like I just can't keep going forward with it even though I need to, so I gotta do some writing on that, you know. It's like, so I've got this whole queue of personal things, you know, that literally it's how you patch yourself together and keep yourself moving. And so I can't overstate the importance of stories. So
yeah, and I think this especially this last line this last bit of the thread you're talking about is what gets us up in the morning. From my point of view, stories is what gets us through the day. The story you tell yourself about why it's important to go to work, the story you tell yourself about why it's important to respect others, the story you tell yourself about why giving up something now is going to pay off later, right? Or not, right? Like making all these judgments. These are all stories that we tell ourselves. And a lot of times we don't, you mentioned this earlier, Ken, I think, we don't always question the stories that we were told or the stories that we assembled a long time ago, right? So we have to be kind of careful It could be that
Company.
the stories we're telling ourselves are outdated.
But
I don't know if we talked about this the last episode, but what used to be a life preserver can turn into a boat anchor is one of the things they tell you when you're in therapy, right? Is some of the stories that got me through as a kid may not be the stories I want to be telling myself anymore about what I can control and what I can't control and what I'm responsible for and not responsible for. So I think there's all of this storytelling that we do anyway. And I think there are some of us that take an active, grab on the reins, and they say, well, let me tell another story. Give me a prompt, Eden, and let me tell that story. X presents as Y. That's why I get up in the morning today. So I think that's a valuable element that carries through not just our work life, but our daily life as well. And I think that's really powerful.
So can I interject? I'm going to try to do this, see if I can make it work. I'm not sure it's going to here. But I want to point out, I don't know if it's the intro to the video that I talked about, the last that I did. Okay, so it's.
Go ahead, Aiden. You want to start?
yeah,
Can you guys hear that?
I mean, you had asked me a question about
Okay, hold on one second.
about,
Let me
like, the
rewind it.
It's story time.
Wait, let me turn up the video. Hold on, sorry. Let me do it one more time. Turn up the audio.
It's story time. Time to start the day.
Time to start the day. It's story
Go ahead, Aiden.
time.
You want to start?
Yeah,
It's time to
so
start
I mean,
the
you had asked.
day. So it's on Freesound. So I use the Freesound API to find audio bits. And I spent like 3 hours looking for some sort of jingle, something. Trust me, you guys. Like I spent way more time, and I landed at that, and it's story time. It's time to start the day. And so I was like,
so
I'm going with that.
Me,
Sorry.
This to me sounds exactly like a child's wind-up toy, right?
Yeah.
This is like you pull the
Yeah.
thing, right? It's story time.
Exactly.
I love this. This is like some, archaeological find that you got, and I think it's fantastic. I love it.
I was unsure, you guys, so thank you.
I thought it was great because it was nothing that anyone would expect when they clicked, which was a great way to lead into all the conversations we're having. Like we just covered, I mean, just in this chat, we've covered so much ground, and I think like one of the interesting things we've been talking about this stuff in terms of like our personal lives, but we could do a whole episode framing what are the stories in the API space that like everyone believes, and some of them might be right, some of them might be right and need to be elevated, some of them might be like, is this actually why things are the way they are? Like I remember talking to some people who were at MuleSoft in very early days about like design first and how all that started, and like it's not what one would think, and like that's an interesting story to like have some people talk about, and like other things, like there's probably 50 things we could go deep on, but
well, the number one story on API Evangelist today is the Amazon Bezos Steve Yegi story. Like it does 2,000-3,000 page views a week. If you guys want to unpack that sometime, because it's not true. It's totally not true. Like,
and
but it is.
And he said that, right?
Yeah, but it's the most I've seen my version of it, and this gets back to our attribution is I have people constantly come up to me and go, your story on Amazon. I'm like, it's not my story. It's not my story. But that's another and I've seen it framed in a bank in Amsterdam. I've seen it on the wall. I saw it framed and on the wall in a government agency in DC. And I saw my story framed on the wall in a consultancy in Australia, and like and that's like I'm like, whoa, what the hell? Like I never thought. So
that's the power. That's the power of stories. I think. Yeah, I agree 100%. We could go in so many directions on stories that are repeated, stories that are missed, stories that are helpful, stories that are not, voices that are not heard. There's all sorts of stuff. We've got all sorts of space here.
Yeah, I like it.
I was going to say we should have people who are not the three of us and who do not look like us as part of this storytelling exercise.
Yeah, have a very different story to tell that may be very contrary to the stories that I tell, right? I would love this.
Well, I think we're going into the last bits here, and I think going in, let's talk about the mechanics, how and why and what we're doing. Closing, I think it's good as to kind of get us into the next. Is yes, I want to keep doing this every week, but I leave it to you guys, and I'll make suggestions like how do we bring someone else into this? How do we accommodate one of us not being available one week or two? I think we got to think about that. I think so let's think about it. I would definitely love to get other voices, so it's not just us three white men talking on the thing. And how do we evolve that? So
yeah, I love that idea, and I think another thing that might help others be more comfortable, because a lot of it's about safety, right? Mm-hmm. So then again, there's some privilege in this room about safety that others may not share. So having some themes, having some topics ahead of time that we know we're going to talk about, like the examples, we've come up with a bunch of them about certain stories that we repeat. The one Yegi story, like I would love to hear tons of points of view. Like the first time I heard that story, I didn't.
Yeah.
So I think that might help create a more scalable space as well. So other people might feel a lot more comfortable because they might have an anchor, a story that they know that they can share. So I think themes, finding more people, coming up with patterns that allow people to be, safely tell their story is the thing that would be really, really important. We can talk about that a little bit more. Maybe we can send some notes back and forth on that.
Yeah, and I think if we pick a theme and we also line up a first couple, we'll learn how to do it right. I think one of the things we've complicated for ourselves is that the premise of the first two episodes of this have been sort of our like philosophical breakdown of why we think stories are important and why they, need to be a bigger part of the industry. And I think like a lot of the people who will tell the best stories aren't spending their time telling stories about storytelling.
Right.
And we have to make sure that we aren't like that's sort of the embodiment of this and how we're getting into it. But I think the best thing that we can do with our positioning on how we believe stories are so important is to leave all of ours at the door and to let people share theirs in a way that doesn't feel conscripted or like they must fit into a template. To me, that's the thing that's hard to do here. Mm-hmm. So it's not about storytelling, it's about your story, and we want to be here and listen to it. And it's a different skill set than being able to talk about storytelling. And we all have the skill set. Like I'm not saying we don't, but it's just like a different way we'll have to set these up if we want to bring guests in.
That's good. That's really good.
I
like that a lot.
I would augment on both what you said. So bringing other voices in, and not that we have to do either, we can choose either route, but we also can't assume everyone's got a full hour on a Friday afternoon to do this. So and this could be each of our individuals' homework. Can one of us or a group of us or all of us go grab and do a recording of someone and get their story or have a conversation, bring them and then augment and put it into this. So it's not, maybe it's I've been working on how to figure that out because it's, I want to bring in other voices and have my face not be, in it, but how can we still keep layering in diverse voices? Let's think about it.
So it's our equivalent of a field piece. Yeah. Go out and visit with someone and then bring that back.
Yeah.
Well, also just from the idea of putting people at ease, 3-on-1 is not how you get people to share with you.
So tell us your story.
Tell us your story.
So I had someone in the OAI call, or it was what? Yeah, it was the OAI marketing goes, look, it's Rush Limbaugh to me on my with my microphone thing. Like, are you gonna replace Rush Limbaugh? And I was like, yes, that's actually a really good idea. I would very much be happy to replace him. And so I was like, new mission. But anyways, it made me realize like, oh no, I'm a loud, yelly dude. Like,
a loud, yelly white guy.
With a big microphone. Like, oh no. Like, so yes, tell me your story. I need to. But,
All right, okay. I'm ready.
Yeah, reporting from the field. No, I mean this has been great, and I think we should. I think offline we should talk about what the mission of this is, Like we can start just doing a few more stories, but I think if we really wanted to encourage people to share like user stories and some of these things in a public place, like as like an artifact that people who are innovating can use, that could be really interesting. And I would certainly give some of the stories that I have to that and hope that other people would do the same thing. Because it'd just be like, it's almost like an RFC, but for like innovation. It's like we've been talking to all these people. Here's this like global perspective that takes into account the diversity of all the different teams working in the API space, the different people and different constituents. And here's some of the like the annual list of things that like still need some help, and the annual list of like stories we believe a little less than we did before. And that's something that could be orienting towards the industry if we're able to publish it in a like trusted way.
This can. So do you guys know the StoryCorps? StoryCorps idea. So like it's just getting people to sit and tell, right? And then you collect those up and they become an archive, which is a reflection of the way people are thinking and behaving in any one time. So that's sort of, to me, Aiden, that sort of kind of sounds like this. Like this becomes, well, let me go to the story, the API storyteller, and find some stories that are interesting to me, that reflect, or let me go ahead and contribute. You could almost, one of the ways the StoryCorps works is they set up this little recording booth, and they try to make it like super easy for you to just step in and talk. Just go ahead and step in and talk. So you could almost think of creating a way for people to easily tell an API story without any of us around, right? Just do this, and then we'll include it or something. There's all sorts of possibilities here.
60 minutes for API storytelling.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
So just, for the record, I keep calling Aiden's company Optic StoryCorps for APIs. Like that's how I see his company, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
So, how do you feel about that, Aiden? What does that mean to you?
I'm honored. I want to know more about why you think that, but generally it's high honor, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll unpack that in the future. So I would say, let's wrap it up here, but let's, there's a lot of things I want to unpack from both these talks. There's a lot of topics that we hit on that I think need to be revisited. Two, let's really all three, think of over the next week and onward, how can we bring in other voices, and how can we make people feel totally at ease and comfortable in telling their story? And as you said, Aiden, not elevate it to be about storytelling. Stories about storytelling can be anything. But who's our cast of characters? Who do we want? I'm thinking. Oh my God! Now I'm dropping his name. The old PBS guy who got in trouble for being too. Charlie Rose.
Oh, Charlie Rose.
In my mind, as you guys were talking, I'm like, API storytelling is where you go to find like his catalog of people, as I used to see it before he got too handsy and too weird.
Yeah.
But think about it, you guys. I think that's
cool. I like this a lot. Well, I've had a great time as usual, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And maybe we'll see each other next week again.
We will see each other next week.
I think so.
One way or the other.
Have a good weekend, you guys.
Thanks, guys.
And that's the story. I love that.
And that's the story. I made that up on the spot.
There you go. Bye-bye.
All right, see you guys.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
It's story time. Time to start the day.